I lost an arm on my last trip home, my left arm, and I lost about a year of my life and much of the comfort and security I had not valued until it was gone. Kindred by Octavia E. Butler was published in 1979. It's about a modern black woman who is violently pulled back in time to a Maryland plantation in the antebellum South. And it's here where Dana must repeatedly save the life of Rufus Whalen, a white slave owner who turns out to be her ancestor. But the book doesn't explain how the time travel works. There's no machine or gimmicks. In fact, we get very little science at all. Yet Butler is one of the most important science fiction writers of the 20th century. She's best known for her Parable series and the Exogenesis trilogy, but Kindred stands apart from everything else she wrote. And here's the thing: Butler herself didn't even consider it science fiction. She called it grim fantasy. In a 2003 radio interview, she explained it like this: well, Kindred really isn't science fiction, just because there's no science in it. I don't know how people feel about Fahrenheit 451, but it kind of fits into science fiction in the same way that my book, Parable of the Sower, does. It's not so much the science, it's the future, looking into the future. But Kindred is definitely not. Just because I was called a science fiction writer, it gets called science fiction. And she's right. There's no technological escape here or the explanation for the impossible. Instead, Kindred operates as a memory machine. It's a narrative device designed to collapse the distance between the reader and the antebellum South, the comfortable cognitive distance we usually maintain when we think about slavery. But with Kindred, Butler won't let you keep that distance. The opening lines of the book doesn't invite you into a world of wonder. They don't promise the escapism we often associate with time travel. Instead, they present you with a mutilation. And from the very first sentence, Butler is warning you that Dana returns physically diminished. Her body is permanently marked by the friction between the past and the present. In other words, you can't engage with the traumatic history of American slavery and emerge unscathed. There's no clean break from the past. It marks the body. It claims its pound of flesh. To understand what Butler is doing here, we have to look at when she wrote Kindred. Although published in 1979, the book is set a few years earlier in 1976. Now, why does that matter? Originally, Butler toyed with opening the book on April 4th, 1968, the day Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, and she wanted to do this to capture that raw, immediate trauma. But she shifted it to 1976 to create a specific, bitter irony. Now, think about what was happening in America during that time. It was the bicentennial. The entire country was draped in red, white, and blue, celebrating 200 years of independence. Butler saw the irony in that party. We were celebrating 2 centuries of freedom while conveniently ignoring the reality that for a massive chunk of time, Black Americans weren't even considered citizens. By setting Dana's modern life against the backdrop of the bicentennial, Butler's highlighting our national cognitive dissonance. She's juxtaposing the fireworks with the whip. But the real origins of Kindred came from a much more personal place for Butler. It goes back to her time at Pasadena City College in the late 1960s. She was in class during the height of the Black Power movement, and she had this young classmate who was just absolutely furious. He was deeply ashamed of the older generations of African Americans. He felt they had been too subservient to white authority. As she recalls, I heard some remarks from a young man who was the same age I was, but who had apparently never made the connection with what his parents did to keep him alive. He was still blaming them for their humility and their acceptance of disgusting behavior on the part of employers and other people. He said, I'd like to kill all those old people who have been holding us back for so long, but I can't because I'd have to start with my own parents. When he said us, he meant Black people. And when he said old people, he meant older Black people. That was actually the germ of the idea for Kindred. I've carried that comment with me for 30 years. He felt so strongly ashamed of what the older generation had to do without really putting it into the context of being necessary for not only their lives, but his as well. This sentiment reflected a broader ideological schism of the late 1960s. The rising militancy of the era often framed the survival strategies of previous generations as cowardice or collaboration. The young man blamed the older generation for their humility and their acceptance of disgusting behavior, without contextualizing those behaviors as necessary tools for survival. He viewed history through the lens of masculine heroism, where the only valid response to oppression was violent, overt rebellion. But if the classmate provided the political spark, Butler's mother provided the emotional heart of the novel. See, Butler's mother, she worked as a domestic servant to support the family. And as a child, Butler often accompanied her mother to work while entering white homes through back doors and watching her mother endure the condescension of her employers. See, Butler admitted to feeling ashamed of her mother's subservience when she was young, mirroring the sentiments of her radicalized classmate. However, as she matured, she came to understand that her mother's acceptance of indignity, it was a shield. As she put it, I ate because of what she did. And Kindred functions as an act of atonement and recognition for the unsung heroism of survival practiced by women like her mother. It's a narrative recovery project designed to make visible the immense strength required to swallow one's pride to ensure the survival of the next generation. Here's a detail that changes how you read the whole book. Butler originally intended the protagonist of Kindred to be a man, specifically to mirror her classmate. She wanted to send him back to learn a lesson. She wanted him to feel the impossible choices and the crushing weight of a system designed to break the human spirit. But she couldn't do it. She realized that a black man in the antebellum South, with that 1960s militant attitude, would be perceived as dangerous and killed immediately. As she wrote, he wouldn't even have the time to learn the rules of submission. The fantasy of the ruggedly individualistic hero, it was incompatible with the laws of American slavery. To make the book work long enough to explore the complexities of the plantation system, the protagonist had to be a woman. And this shift in gender was crucial. It allowed Butler to explore the networks of communal ties and the specific vulnerability of the female body under slavery. It shifted the focus from the public spectacle of rebellion like Nat Turner and Frederick Douglass to the private domestic struggle for continuity. By placing a modern educated woman in the position of her ancestors, Butler forces the reader to confront the grim fantasy of the past as a participant who must learn the cost of survival firsthand. Usually in science fiction, there's a gadget that bridges the gap between now and then: time machine, a portal, some kind of device that explains the impossible. But in Kindred, the mechanism is entirely biological. It works like a summons. Every time Dana's distant ancestor Rufus thinks he's going to die, he pulls Dana to him across time. And the only way Dana can get back to 1976 is if she believes she's going to die. That's the rule. Fear for your life, and you snap back to the present. But here's what makes it unbearable: time compresses. Years passed in the 19th century while only hours passed in 1976. So Dana never has time to heal. She goes back, survives something horrific, and then returns home for a few hours. And then she's dragged back again. The trauma is relentless. But beyond the genetic connection, Butler is binding their lives together through survival. And it creates this really disturbing dynamic. Through time travel to the antebellum South, we have the oppressor holding the life of the oppressed in his hands. But now, this is the critical part. The oppressor also relies on the oppressed to survive. Rufus can't live without Dana, and Dana can't escape without Rufus pushing her to the brink of death. So the first time she goes back, Rufus is just a little boy, maybe just 5 years old, and he's drowning in a river. And Dana saves him. She acts on instinct. Of course, she's going to save a drowning child if she can. That's what any decent person would do. But as she keeps getting pulled back, she watches him grow up. And this is where one of the secondary tragedies of the book sets in. We see that Rufus isn't born a monster. He's a lonely, somewhat neglected kid who actually likes Dana. He listens to her, and at least at first, he seems malleable. And this sets up one of the central questions Butler is wrestling with: nature versus nurture. Can a good person remain good inside a corrupt system? We want to believe the answer is yes. We want to believe that if we were there, we'd be the exception, that we'd resist and stay moral. But Butler says no, you wouldn't. We watch in real time as the institution of slavery slowly eats away at Rufus's humanity. We see the exact moments where his entitlement hardens into cruelty. Dana tries so hard to guide him and be his moral compass. She thinks she can save him from becoming like his father. But as she later reflects, I thought of Rufus and his father, of Rufus becoming his father. It would happen someday in at least one way. Someday, Rufus would own the plantation. And it does happen because the system is stronger than the individual. The absolute power he holds over other human beings inevitably corrupts him. That drowning boy becomes a tyrant who's indistinguishable from his father. And then we have to talk about Kevin. Kevin is Dana's white husband. And when he eventually gets pulled back in time with Dana, his reaction is telling. At first, he treats it almost like an intellectual adventure. He's fascinated. He talks about getting to watch the building of the country and how this could be a great time to live in. He has this distance from the horror because historically the horror wasn't designed for him. For Dana, the past is a threat. It's a place where her body is property and she has no rights. It's where she could be beaten, raped, or killed at any moment. For Kevin, it's a history lesson. And that blindness puts them both in danger. He doesn't understand that you just can't visit this era. You either dominate, you submit, or you die. There's no middle ground. And it takes a long time for Kevin to realize that the past isn't a spectator sport. But even then, his trauma is fundamentally different from hers. He gets to play the role of the observer and even the protector. But Dana, she never gets that luxury. And this dynamic forces Dana into a terrible position within the plantation hierarchy. She's not quite a field slave, but she's not really a house slave in the traditional sense either. She's an educated modern Black woman who reads, writes, and talks back. And this confuses everyone. The white owners don't know what to do with her, and the enslaved community doesn't fully trust her. Here's what I think Butler is doing with this. Now, in traditional slave narratives, literacy is often the key to freedom. Learning to read and write is the vehicle for liberation because it's empowerment. But in Kindred, Dana's literacy is a liability. It marks her as different. It alienates her from the slave community and makes her a threat to the masters. This is Butler saying that the intellectual tools from the future are not merely enough to dismantle the brute force of the past. The plantation is a place where human beings are reduced to units of production and reproduction. And Dana's not going to change that with knowledge alone. While on the plantation, Dana meets Sarah the cook. Now, Sarah is essentially the matriarch of the enslaved community. And through Sarah, Butler tears apart the old offensive stereotype of the happy mammy. You know the image: the big Black woman who loves her white family and who's content in her servitude and exists only to comfort and serve. See, Sarah runs the house. She keeps everything functioning. To the outside world, she looks submissive. She looks like she's accepted her place. But Butler peels back the layers to show us what's really happening. Sarah's submission is a calculated, desperate survival strategy. She's seen her children sold away, ripped from her arms and sold to strangers. She only has one daughter left, and she will swallow every ounce of pride, every ounce of rage, just to keep that one child safe. What the field slave sees as weakness, Butler shows us in strength. The strength it takes to endure. As Dana tells Kevin at one point, you don't have to beat people to treat them brutally. Now, of course, Butler is aware of the physical brutalities of slavery, but she's also focused on the insidious destruction of the family and oneself. It's the constant threat of being sold away from your loved ones, and the erosion of identity through the slow, grinding process of accommodation required just to survive another day. And this is the part that brings us to the core conflict that drives the rest of the book. Dana knows that for her to survive, for her to even exist, she has to ensure that Rufus lives long enough to rape a woman named Alice and father a child. And that child will be Dana's ancestor. See, that's the chain. That's how she exists. And this binds Dana to her oppressor. She becomes the protector of the man who represents the destruction of her people. She must be complicit in her own genealogy. She must enable the rape that creates her family line. And what Butler is saying is that for African Americans, the future is inextricably built upon the past. One cannot exist without the other. You can't separate the trauma from the existence. The family tree is rooted in violence, and Dana has to accept that. She has to live with that. This challenges the idea that time moves forward, and as progress happens, that we escape the past. Butler's saying no. The future is not a liberation from the past. It's a product of its darkest moments. Now, I know I've touched on many of the characters in Kindred already, but I want to take a moment to explore how Butler uses them as more than just people in a story. See, these characters embody the conflicting forces of ancestry, privilege, and survival. And they're all arguments about history made flesh. Let's start with Dana. She begins the novel as a modern observer. She has 20th century sensibilities and, as a result, believes in her own agency and freedom. She represents the generation that came after the civil rights movement, the generation that's confident in their identity and takes certain freedoms for granted. But the novel systematically dismantles this confidence. See, Dana has to navigate the expectations of what resistance should look like while inhabiting a body that is uniquely vulnerable in 1815. Not only is she a woman, she's a black woman. And that means she's vulnerable to the sexual and reproductive violence of slavery in ways that are just horrendously appalling. Her journey is one of shedding her modern arrogance. She learns, and not quickly, mind you, that resistance in 1815 doesn't look like the open defiance of the 1960s. It doesn't look like marches or protests. It looks like the silent endurance of Sarah the cook. It looks like keeping your head down and staying alive. See, Dana serves as the bridge between understanding history intellectually and experiencing it in your body. He moves from judging the past to surviving it. And her survival is messy. Her ancestor Alice accuses her of being a race traitor because of her closeness to Rufus. Her perspective is skewed, and it's because Dana occupies this treacherous middle ground. She's too close to the master. She has the privileges that other slaves don't have, and that isolates her. Dana is the alien other in both timelines. In 1976, she's too black for white society, and then in 1815, she's too white for the enslaved community. She talks and acts differently and doesn't know the rules of survival that everyone else has learned from birth. Her arc is the painful realization that she can't save everyone and that her own existence is purchased with the suffering of others. Then we have Rufus. Rufus is a terrifying antagonist because he's real. He's not some cartoonish villain. He's kin. He's a man who loves Dana. or at least he thinks he does, and he relies on her. Yet he can't transcend the world he was born into. It's the social inheritance of his time. Butler uses Rufus to destroy the belief that education and empathy can cure racism. Dana educates Rufus. She saves his life over and over and tries to teach him right from wrong. And yet he still grows into a rapist and a slaveholder. And it's because the system is stronger than the individual. Rufus represents the corrupting influence of absolute power. He's not born evil. Butler makes that clear from the start. But as he grows up, he learns that he can do whatever he wants to the people he owns. And there are no consequences because of his skin tone. The law protects him, and society even encourages him. His father models it for him. And slowly, that power eats away at whatever decency he might have had. And there's a moment in the book where Dana reflects on this, and she realizes he wasn't a monster at all. He was just an ordinary man who did monstrous things because his society said those things were legal and proper. And that's what makes him so frightening. He embodies the systemic nature of slavery. It's not just about individual malice, it's a structure and a system that incentivizes brutality. And his love for Alice and Dana? It's possessive and destructive. Within the framework of slavery, his love becomes indistinguishable from ownership. And speaking of Alice, she's Dana's great grandmother, and she acts as Dana's double. They look so much alike that Rufus sees them as two halves of the same woman, but their fates are determined by when they were born. Alice is born into slavery, and therefore she has no escape. And it's because Alice is the field slave reality to Dana's house slave privilege, and she serves as a mirror that reflects the limits of Dana's agency. See, when Dana's life is threatened, she escapes to the future. When Alice's life is threatened, she has no escape but death. Alice's suicide is one of the most important moments in the book because it's an act of resistance. It refutes the idea that enslaved people were passive, that they just accepted their fate. Alice chooses death over submission. She chooses to end her life rather than continue living as Rufus's property. And her tragedy forces Dana to confront the reality that without the luxury of time travel, she would be Alice. Kevin, meanwhile, he functions as a critique of white privilege. In 1976, he's a progressive ally. He married a black woman and he's sympathetic to the struggle. But in 1815, his whiteness grants him immediate safety and power. He can pose as a slaveholder and he can travel freely. However, Kevin finds himself useless in the face of the plantation's machinery. He can't protect Dana from the whip, just like legally he can't free the slaves. He wants to help, but he can't. And his experience in the past leaves him with a jagged scar on his forehead. It's a physical mark that shows he too has been touched by history. But his trauma is fundamentally different from Dana's. He represents the limitations of white liberalism, the realization that good intentions are not enough against structural oppression. His inability to fully adapt or to save Dana highlights the gap between sympathy and lived experience. You can sympathize with someone's suffering, you can care deeply, but you can't truly understand what it means to live in a body that the system was designed to exploit and destroy. Finally, Butler populates the plantation with characters who defy the passive victim. And that's a stereotype that has plagued depictions of slavery for a very long time. Sarah the cook is the mammy figure reimagined. She's a pragmatic survivor who's holding onto her last remaining child with everything she has. She's seen her other children sold away, and she will do anything and swallow any humiliation to keep that child safe. And Carrie, her daughter, is an interesting character in her own right. Not only is she mute, but she also serves as a kind of moral center on the plantation. There's a moment where Dana worries she's becoming too much like the whites, that she's losing herself and her identity. And Carrie rubs Dana's face as if to say, the black doesn't come off. Your identity is rooted in your shared suffering with this community. You're one of us, whether you like it or not. And it's a powerful allusion to the veil metaphor by W.E.B. Du Bois. And these characters, they're there to teach Dana that the true meaning of resistance is not always dramatic and it's not always visible. Sometimes resistance is just a preservation of community and family in the face of annihilation. Sometimes it's just staying alive one more day. So Dana ultimately kills Rufus. He attempts to rape her after Alice's death. And in that moment, she realizes he's never going to stop. He's never going to let her go. So she kills him, and this act of lethal self defense triggers her final return in 1976. But here's the thing: Rufus doesn't let go. Even in death, he grips her arm. And as she transports back to the present, her arm remains behind. Dana materializes in her living room with her arm fused into the wall of her 1976 home. This is the mutilation we read about in the opening lines. The lost arm is the novel's master symbol. It's Butler saying that there is no return from the past without cost. The sanitized version of history that we read in the textbooks, yeah, you learn about slavery and you feel bad, but then you move on with your life. Kindred says the true engagement with the history of slavery leaves a permanent mark. Dana is maimed by history in both the literal and metaphorical sense. And you have to think about what this means. Just as fugitive slaves often found their freedom in the North tainted by the loss of family, and also the knowledge that loved ones were still in chains, Dana's return is marked by permanent loss. She's free and back in 1976, but she's not whole. And this loss also carries another layer of meaning. And it's because Dana is a writer, and now she's lost her left arm. It castrates Dana's creative agency and silences her in a way. It symbolizes how slavery fractured the African American creative voice and how it stole something that can never be fully recovered. In the epilogue, Dana and Kevin travel to present day Maryland. They want to find the proof of their experience. They want to see the records of the Wayland plantation, of Rufus, of Alice, and of all the people they knew. But they find almost nothing. The plantation is gone and the records are scant. Rufus is listed as dying in a fire. That's it. The slaves? They're not even listed at all. Their names don't appear. Their lives don't matter to the official record. This silence of the archives is Butler's final comment on how history is written. The official history books don't contain the truth of the enslaved. They contain the names of the masters. They contain the dates of the sales and even the inventories of property. But the voices, the stories, and the humanity of the enslaved, they're completely gone. The only proof of the past lies in Dana's missing arm. The lived experience of the descendant is the only true archive of the ancestor's pain. Octavia Butler's Kindred is a rebuke to the arrogance of any generation that believes it has transcended its history without reckoning with it. It's aimed at Butler's classmate at Pasadena City College who asked why enslaved people didn't fight back. But it's also aimed at all of us. Anyone who thinks they would have done better. Anyone who judges the survival strategies of the people living in conditions they can't even imagine. But it also serves as a warning. The structures of power, race, and violence that defined the Wayland plantation, they haven't vanished. They've mutated. As Dana notes, they've transformed into the slave markets of modern labor and the inequalities of the justice system, even the cliched bigotry that still exists in our suburbs and our cities. The past isn't dead. It's not even past. The young man at Pasadena City College wanted to kill the past to liberate the future. Butler shows us that to kill the past is to kill yourself. You can't amputate your history without bleeding. You can't pretend it didn't happen. Instead, we have to touch the wound. We have to acknowledge the pain and understand that we are kindred to the monsters and the martyrs alike. That's what the title means. Kindred. We're connected and bound to this history, whether we like it or not. And Butler is saying that until we face that, until we really reckon with what was done and what continues to be done, we're going to keep repeating the same cycles. We're going to keep losing pieces of ourselves. I want to leave this video with a short excerpt from Michelle Cliff's Within the Veil. Color isn't no faucet. You can't turn it off and on. I say color isn't no faucet. You can't turn it off and on. Tell the world who you are, or you might as well be gone. All right, guys, that's it for today's video. I know this was a heavy one and deals with themes not regularly seen on the channel. If you've made it this far, I appreciate you joining me. I've left a list of sources in the comments. I've also compiled a list of books I found interesting throughout my time with African American literature. And I want to give a huge shout out to Dr. Tanya Clark at Morehouse College for introducing me to Octavia Butler and many, many more touching works. I hope you're doing well, Dr. Clark. Now, if you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends, family, and even your enemies. And of course, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button because every subscriber inches me one step closer to taking over the galaxies. Until next time, take care, keep reading, and I'll see you in the next one.